Hello there, world of tankers, and welcome to the channel. I'm your host, Droodles Blitz, and this is going to be a long video because I am going to be writing down all of the balance changes that I would like to see happen in World of Tanks Blitz. There are quite a few tier 10s in the game, 67 to be exact, technically 66 because of the Sheridan missile, which we're not going to be breaking into. So 66 tier 10s are going to be rebalanced in today's video, and I'm going to be going in depth into each of these tier 10s if I think they need balancing and what I think should be done. So starting off, we have the XM66F Sheridan. This is a tier 10 American light tank. It features a lot of mobility and a very high alpha damage. I actually think the current variant of the Sheridan is very strong. Its accuracy, aiming time, and mobility are all very, very good, and I actually don't want to see any changes to the Sheridan to its current state. The only thing that I would personally like to see changed on the Sheridan is that it gets a 105mm gun added. That's what I want to see. Something similar to that of an M48 Patton. Obviously, with worse DPM, maybe 3,200 DPM and a little bit worse penetration, but I want the Sheridan to have two different gun options. I want it to have the high alpha, and I also want it to be a flexible, solid DPM light that kind of has something similar to that, like a Vickers. I think that would create a very different playstyle, and it would appease two separate types of players. People that want to use the derp gun, and people that also want to use a highly accurate, high DPM gun. So that is what I personally would like to see for the Sheridan. That's really all I would do. I think the rest of it is pretty well balanced, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. It's a very strong tank. Well, it turns out I accidentally ended my recording and didn't even realize. Thankfully, I wrote down all of the changes that I was talking about, thank God. So I'm just going to talk about what I wrote down for some of the American vehicles that I was making my way through. Let's continue with the Sheridan. As I said, I want a 105mm armament added. And if that is the case, I would like it to have 3,200 damage per minute when fully equipped. That is not counting rammer. If you're running rammer, I would like to have an additional 100 or whatever the buff is, so it would be like 3,350 with gun rammer, 3,200 base. This gun would obviously feature 350 damage per shot, 300mm of base heat penetration, so with Cali it would be quite a bit more, and 0.308 dispersion with 2.5 seconds of aiming time. This would allow the Sheridan to have two different playstyles, catering to two different types of people. People that want an accurate, solid light for bleeding and scouting, and then also people like me who want a bigger, higher chunk into their opponents. I think this makes sense as well, because the T92E1, which is the tier 9 on the line, also features two separate gun options, one with solid DPM that is 105mm, and one that is 152, so I think that's only fair that the tier 10 gets one as well. Then we move on to the M48 Patton, which, as you can see, there's only two changes I want done. First of all, I would like the turret armor nerfed by 20mm. Right now, the M48 Patton using gun depression is, in my opinion, too strong. It's basically impossible to penetrate the turret cheeks. They're over 300mm effective, especially if you're running enhanced armor like I am. And I don't think that's fair. I think that the turret cheeks should be a little bit weaker. So 10, 20mm weaker, just so that heat shells can cut through, but not so that AP ammunition has an easy chance. The other change I would make is just allow the gun to be a little bit more accurate, going from 0.317 to 0.308. This would allow the vehicle, while getting that slight armor nerf, to also have a slight buff in terms of its accuracy, allowing it to feel a bit more flexible and a bit more enjoyable. The only other change I would make is 9 degrees of gun depression over the entire vehicle, apart from the rear, because obviously the engine deck, but I think the sides and the front should have 9 degrees, not just a small window over the front of the tank and then 8 over the sides. The Patton in general is a really well-balanced tank as it is, so I don't really think it needs too many changes. Right now, I would say that the M48 Patton and M60 are quite similar in their capabilities. And because of that, I would like to make a bit of a differentiation between the two vehicles, especially for players that have both. In my opinion, right now, there's not much of a reason to drive the M60 when the M48 Patton has much better turret armor. So with my plans to balance the M60, we can see that I do have some changes that I would like to occur. First of all, the current .317 of the M60 I would like buffed quite a bit to go down to .29. If we're buffing the M48 Patton to .308, I think it's only fair that we also buff the M60 on its dispersion. See, what I would like for the M60 is the turret armor to stay the same. It's about 50 millimeters less effective than the M48 Pattons right now. And that's fine with me, because I think that this tank should feature a worse turret, but in return, a much better gun and a little bit better mobility. So as you can see, I think it should have 360 damage per shot instead of the current 350, putting a bit of a difference between the Pattons. The Patton has 340 damage per shot. I think 360 would make this different. And not only that, but I think the DPM should be higher on this vehicle as well. So we're looking more at around 3,400 damage per minute, so 140 buff from what it currently has, which would place it just about 80 or so more than the M48 Patton. I think that would be a pretty solid way to make the M60 a bit more of a hard-hitting, more passive medium, and then the M48 Patton a bit more of an aggressive, haul-down, brawling tank. The M60 can still get haul down, and it still can get bounces, but I think that it is fair that if this tank wants a bit more DPM and alpha, it should also have some downsides. But obviously, with the increased mobility on this tank at 52 versus the 48 on the M48, I think that's actually a pretty fair counter between the two, and I think it would drive different types of players to both types of vehicles. So let me know what you think. That brings us to the M6Yo, which is a really tricky vehicle to balance, and I think that Wargaming has done a pretty mediocre job when it comes to the balance of this vehicle. They don't really want to touch the guns, and I think that's what really needs to happen. So let's start off with a 120mm. This, in my opinion, is quite overpowered. The fact that it can deal 900 damage in 1.71 seconds is unfair. I just don't think it's fair that a tank can deal almost the same damage as an FE2 and 5B 183 with 10 degrees of gun depression, solid mobility, and hit points. I just don't think it's really fair, and I mean, the statistics show I'm averaging a crazy amount of damage with pretty solid win rate in this vehicle just with that double shotgun. So my proposal for this tank is very simple. With a double shotgun, take away reticle calibration. I think that's a stupid consumable to put on a tank that features the level of damage output it has. So remove reticle calibration. However, I think shell reload boost should stay. Then what I would like to do is keep the damage per minute the same by buffing the magazine reload time, but nerf the shell reload time. So what I mean is that the intra clip should go from around 1.71 seconds to around 4. Something similar to that of an Object 752, but in return, the vehicle gets to keep the 2500 DPM it has. This would solve two problems. First of all, people would still have the same level of damage per minute, so you can't really complain it's getting worse. But at the same time, it gives other players a fair chance to reverse out of harm's way. It also makes shell reload boost a useful consumable on the double shot because you can make your interclip just that little bit faster. So I think that this is a really fair way to do both things. When it comes to the triple shot, there's only one change I would make, and that is to make the intraclip just a slight bit longer, from 2.5 to 2.8. Again, I'm completely fine with the tank keeping shell reload boost, but I do think that the current level of damage output the vehicle has is just a little bit stronger than I would like, and I think that autoloaders in general should be balanced on their clipping time. So 2.8 seconds is still very quick. With shell reload boost, it would allow you to, if you play it properly, get out still a lot of damage in less than 4 seconds. But I think at the same time, it would be fair if the tank lost maybe 100 DPM with the triple shot, and in return, didn't have as fast of an intraclip. So that's how I see the M6Yo. It would still be an incredible tank. It would still feature really good DPM. And judging that I want to balance out the rest of the tanks, I think it would fit really well in. That brings us to the T110E5. And there's really not much I want done to the E5. There's two things. First of all, I think we can all agree that the reverse speed on this vehicle is terrible. 12 kilometers per hour is kind of a joke. And especially in the meta of autoloaders right now, it's very hard to deal with bad track wheels and getting back into cover. So buff that reverse speed to 15. It will make it so much more enjoyable for every player. Not only that, but I think the turret should be nerfed by about 10 millimeters on the turret, going from 258 effective to 248. If you want to get more armor, you can run enhanced. But I think right now that the E5 turret cheeks are just a little bit too hard to cut through. The fact that even loading gold with the majority of tier 10 heavies, you have almost no chance of hitting the hatch due to the way it's angled, and the turret cheeks are nearly impervious, plus the fact the E5 is such an accurate gun and everything else. I just feel like this tank should have a bit of a weakness when using its gun depression, just like as I explained the M48 pattern. So while I don't think the turret should be weak by any means, I do think it should be weak enough that if a well-placed shot is fired at the turret cheeks, it will be buffed. Or not buffed, penned. The other change, which I would like fixed, is the gun mantlet. You can actually shoot directly through the gun on the E5 with APCR and high pen AP, and it will penetrate the tank. This is something I've covered many times on the channel, and guess what? Still has not been fixed. So that is definitely something I would like to see changed on the vehicle. Apart from that, make the ammo rack stronger. I'm sick and tired of getting full health ammo racked in my E5 and rolling around a corner. It's incredibly annoying, so make the modules just a little bit stronger on the tank as well. In general, the E5 is just an incredible tank, and there's really not much that needs to happen. Concept 1B, I mean, you can see all I wrote down was AP standard. I think right now the concept is a really well-balanced tank. It's fast, reaching a top speed of 45, and its reverse speed is quick, but nothing insane. It has solid DPM and good accuracy, but it does have a bit lower damage per shot than the average heavy, and its penetration is also quite a bit lower, so it makes it trickier to cut through enemy armor, and you lose a lot of damage when loading gold. The tank does feature 10 degrees of gun depression and incredible levels of turret armor, but if you know where to shoot, you can hatch it, and its upper plate is not that hard to cut through. While the concept definitely in a good player's hands can be formidable, I think that it's also a pretty well-balanced tank in the current state, and very enjoyable to drive. The only thing I don't like is APCR standard. I think it takes away from a bit of the fun. So, give it AP standard, and at the same time, take away some of its shell velocity. That way, it's just like an AP shell, but you have that nicer penetration, so you don't need to load as much gold. I think it's a little unfair that some vehicles, like the 57 Heavy, got AP penetration buffs with calibrated shells rework, but tanks that have APCR didn't. That's at least how I personally see it, so I think it would be nice to have a little bit of a pen increase on the concept's AP. The T57 Heavy is a rather tricky one that has multiple different ways that we can buff it. But the way that I'm going to go, first of all, is the same problem I have with the T110E5. Its reverse speed is awful. I hate the fact that it only goes at 12, especially once you've dumped a clip and you are very vulnerable. It's a tricky situation. I personally would like to see the reverse speed buffed to 15 kilometers per hour. But in return, there's two nerfs I would like to see. I want to see the turret armor nerfed by about 20 millimeters. Specifically, I want the troll spots removed. I think that if you are aiming in on a T57 Heavy, you should be able to pen the turret if you shoot a well-placed shot on the cheeks every single time. It is so annoying that, especially with vehicles that have APCR standard, that when you are aiming in on a T57 Heavy, it's a 50-50 whether you're going to pen or not due to the angles it features. I don't mind if the hull gets buffed, but the turret should stay weak, and it should be one of the weaknesses of this vehicle like it has been in the past. The other thing I would like nerfed on the vehicle is a slight bit on its intraclip. The DPM can stay the same at 2700, but I would like the intraclip to go from 2.5 seconds base to 3 seconds. This would make the T57 Heavy just a little bit more punishing for the player when they are dealing damage. But with the faster reverse speed, it would also allow them to back up faster. So it's a win-win. For the players that you are shooting at, they have a little bit more time to react to the current situation unfolding, and for the driver of the 57, they are able to back up faster if they are in harm's way. I think this is a good way to balance out the tank and make it more fun for the enemy. And by the way, you still get to keep shell reload boost, so if you need to get out damage faster, once every 58 seconds, you have the ability to reduce your clipping time by 30%. I think that's pretty fair. I think that's pretty balanced. What do you guys think? That brings us to the T95E6, which is an American Tier 10 Heavium. It's a vehicle that is incredibly mobile, more akin to that of a medium, but has hit points like a heavy, which is actually pretty nice. I actually think the armor profile on the E6 is perfectly balanced. Its turret is weak, but also can get bounces. Its hatch is also the same. It's like 220 effective, but because of the way it's angled, you can get some goofy bounces here and there. In general, I think the armor on the E6 is really good for what it is. Not only that, the E6 is incredibly mobile, reaching a top speed of 50, reverses at 15, which is plenty, features solid DPM, has good penetration, decent dispersion. Overall, I really like the T95E6, and there's not too many complaints I can actually say about this tank. But there are two things that I would like changed on the vehicle. First of all, I would like the damage per shot to go down to 380. I think this is still a very nice alpha damage, but the reason I want the alpha to go down just a teeny bit is because I would like the accuracy to get buffed a bit from 0.326 to 0.308, which would allow the vehicle to be just that little bit more accurate and allow it to deal with mediums a tiny bit faster. Keep the DPM the same though. Do not nerf the damage per minute. 380 alpha with a slightly faster reload, but the same damage per minute. When it comes to combat stabilization, gone. This is not a mechanic that should be on the E6. The tank is way too mobile to make it work, so we are going to remove combat stabilization. And I think that's really all the tank needs. It's got DPM, it's got mobility. I would just like the gun to be a little bit more accurate, and I would like combat stabilization gone. And I think lowering the alpha makes it a little bit more fair, because it's not as punishing to get shot by, but at the same time, it makes it a bit better for brawling mediums, which is really what this tank is meant to do. In general, I really like the E6, and I think it should stay the way it currently is, because it's such a fun tank. The T110E5 we already went over, and same for the Concept 1B, so that brings us to the T110E3. This American tank destroyer is a juggernaut. It features incredible frontal protection, a hatch that is nearly impossible to penetrate, a lower plate that is weak, and mostly the track wheels are the big problem. T110E3 is not the most accurate vehicle. I am running refined. Let's fix that so we can actually take a look at its base dispersion, sitting at 0.344. But I think that's more than enough for the very good penetration and high alpha damage of 680. If there was one thing that I would change on the T110E3, it would be the reverse speed. Remove super speed boost. So let's go to the T110E3 and remove speed boost. Then, after removing the speed boost, I would buff reverse, and I would buff it by 5, honestly. I think that this tank deserves 15 kilometers per hour in reverse. It is super immobile on its power to weight. It's actually one of the worst effective power to weight tanks in the game. Its traverse speed is really mediocre, especially on medium terrain. Being able to reverse faster and removing this consumable will put a very fair and balanced way to fix both problems with the tank. I don't really have any other problems with the E3. It's a really solid vehicle when using gun depression. I think the armor is strong. The DPM is good, but nothing overpowered, and its gun depression is very flexible. In general, I don't have any problems with the tank. I think apart from the reverse speed, it does not need any changes. So we're going to move on to the T110E4. Now this is a beast. The E4 is easily one of the strongest tier 10 tank destroyers in the game. And there's only really a couple changes I would do. First of all, everybody hates APCR standard. I'm pretty sure if Wargaming had a poll on players and APCR, everybody would say they don't like it, and it's an awful standard shell. As a premium shell, it's not terrible, but as a standard shell, it's trash. Remove the APCR and make it AP. So let's write that down right now and say T110E4 and buff, or not buff, but should I say AP standard. Then, after giving it AP standard, the other change I would do, once again, is buff the reverse speed. 10 reverse is tragic. It really is. It doesn't deserve to be that slow on reverse. Now, I don't think it should be as fast as the E3 because it is a turreted vehicle, so I think 14 reverse is fine for the tank. It wouldn't be overpowered with that amount of overall capabilities. The final thing I would do is nerf the hatch. The hatch on the E4 is, and always has been, one of the big weak spots on the tank. And I think that the hatch is currently too strong. It's too small. So what I would do is I would nerf the hatch. I'm just going to say nerf hatch. And I would say nerf it by about 20 millimeters. I think that would be fine. I don't want the hatch to be a high explosive weak spot. And I think against AP, it should be about a 50-50. But at the same time, I don't like the fact that the hatch is very troll. I would like it to be either a pen or a bounce. So armor highlighting should be fixed on it, and I think it should just be a little bit larger on the height. I think the old E4 hatch should be a little bit better, but that's how I currently see the E4. I don't think much else really needs to change. The DPM is really solid, the mobility is great, and the DPM and everything is fantastic. So I think it's pretty well balanced. I think the dispersion should stay the way it is. I have no complaints with the current E4. As I said, buffing the reverse and making the hatch a bigger weak spot would be really the only two changes you need, because those would really balance out the tank. You would get punished more for poking, but you would also be able to back up faster, allowing the tank to recover, reload, and poke once again. The XM66F is one of the strongest tier 10s in the game right now. It has great DPM, solid gun depression, really good mobility. It's a jack of all trades, and because of that, it is an absolute beast in the performing category. I would actually like to see a little bit nerfed and a little bit buffed on the tank. The first thing I would like to see is the reverse speed nerfed. I think 20 kilometers per hour is too quick for a vehicle with this amount of armor and this amount of firepower. So I would nerf it by 5 kilometers per hour on the reverse. Then I would make my way over to what I would buff. And it's pretty simple. The gun mantlet is a massive weakness on this tank. You can penetrate it when it's hull down, you can penetrate it really anywhere, and I don't really like that personally. It's already got a lot of weak spots being the lower plate, and I just think that being able to just load gold and shoot through the mantlet itself is kind of goofy. So personally, I would buff the mantlet by maybe about, let's say, 15 millimeters. Enough that you can still cut through it if you have decent gold, but at the same time, it isn't just the easiest penetration ever. I think that these two changes would allow the XM to be more countered due to its reverse speed, but also a little bit stronger when using the gun depression with the hatch. The rest of the tank is pretty strong. It's got really good DPM. Its accuracy is fine. I don't really think much else needs to change, but there's one other thing I would like to do, and that is nerf the gun depression by 2 degrees. I think 8 degrees is still plenty for a vehicle like this to work, and I just think 10 is a little bit too much for a turreted style tank destroyer. So these are all the changes that I would do to the XM. I know some people might not agree, but I think that it would still leave the tank really balanced. The DPM still great and everything, and buffing the mantlet would stop a lot of the shells from penetrating you. But if you buff a tank's armor, you also need to nerf some of the other characteristics. So that's what I'm going with. The Kampfpanzer 50-ton is now the first German tank. Also, sorry about the subscribe notification. I forgot to turn that off. But we have the KPZ 50-ton. And the Kampfpanzer 50-ton is super dangerous. It's got tungsten, it's got adrenaline, it's got solid DPM. Everything in that regard is really, really good. It's got solid heat penetration, and it's a pretty accurate tank for what it is. I actually don't have too many complaints about the Kampfpanzer. I actually think it's a really well-balanced tank in the current state. I don't think it's overpowered because it does have a fairly weak turret that players can cut through, and while its armor and mobility plus DPM is really good, it also has kind of levels of dispersion and aiming time, which can make the gun a little bit goofy. So, in my opinion, Kampfpanzer stays the same. I have absolutely no problem with the tank in its current state, and yeah, I don't think it should change at all, so we'll leave the Kampfpanzer the way it is. Leopard 1 is another incredibly solid medium. It has very high levels of DPM, it has incredible levels of dispersion, high damage per shot, good penetration, 8 degrees gun depression, solid top speed, solid reverse. I actually currently really like the Leopard in its state. I think it's a super fun vehicle to mess around with, and because of that, I also think the Leopard should stay the same. I just realized that you guys couldn't really see the stats I was showing because my little text box was in the way. So I have fixed that, slid the game over a little bit, and now you can actually see the statistics that I'm talking about while we're breaking into the video. So, as I was saying, I think the Leopard, for the most part, should stay the same. There's one change I would like put on the vehicle, and that is the mantlet. I think that the tank right now is incredible. I mean, look at my stats. I've been able to achieve 87% win rate with 3,700 average damage. That's crazy good. I just think that it's very cringe when you go up against a Leopard and you shoot at the turret, it randomly gets bounces on the mantlet due to the way it's shaped. I don't think that should be the case. I think that this should be a literal glass cannon, and basically if you're shot, you're penned. I don't think that it should be high explosive penetrable on the turret, but I do think that the mantlet should be weak enough that basically if you hit it, you're going to pen it every time. So I would nerf it by about 10 millimeters. As you can see, I have written down. I have no problems with the Leopard anywhere else. I think that skilled players should be rewarded for being good at the game. And this is not a high performer on average win rate. It's literally the second worst right above the grill. So it's not like the average player is really making too much of a difference. And judging that skilled players are very rare to find, I just don't see the Leopard really being that much of a problem in its current state. I don't even know why Wargaming wants to nerf the tank. Leave it the way it is, nerf the turret a teeny bit, and it's an absolutely amazing tank. That moves us on to the E50M. And the E50M is obviously an incredibly solid vehicle. It's got mobility, it's got DPM, it's got pretty good accuracy at .308. It's mobile. I mean, there's nothing that I can actually say is bad about the E50M. And again, you can see that with my stats, 3,700 average damage with 84% win rate. You want my opinion? Leave the tank the way it is. It's already incredible. It's already one of the strongest mediums in terms of armor, in terms of everything. There's no reason this tank needs to be buffed or nerfed. It's strong, but it's balanced in a way that I don't hate going up against the tank. Doing what Wargaming has planned and giving it reactive and more DPM and more armor is a stupid change. It's going to take what is a fairly strong, one of the stronger mediums if you ask me, and overcook it beyond belief. Leave it the way it is. It'll be fun. It'll be balanced. So the E50M stays the same. What do we move on to? We have the Mouse. And this is a tank that actually has a pretty solid win rate for the average player, but I don't really think is very fun to use. I mean, you can look at my stats in it, and I've got a solid win rate, but the problem is the average damage just doesn't follow compared to the other tier 10s. You know, you look at something like my VK72, and I'm 3,900 average. So the Mouse is a strong tank, but it's very unenjoyable to drive due to the poor accuracy, the awful penetration, and pretty lackluster armor. So, what would I do to this vehicle? Well, I would do a lot, but I think people would agree with this. First of all, I would buff the HP to 3,400 and remove enhanced sandbags. Doing this, plus improved assembly if you're running it, would give you around 3,550 effective hit points. And that sounds really overpowered. But to counter this, I would leave the dispersion the same, and I would give it 490 damage per shot. Not only would I give it 490 damage per shot, but I would nerf its damage per minute. Currently, the Mouse has 2,500, and that's with double sandbag. If you're running damage per minute on it, you can get it up to 2,700, and that's goofy. I don't think a super heavy like this should have a lot of DPM. I think what it should have is a high alpha, and not so much DPM, but more pushing potential. So, for me, I would give the Mouse, as I said, 490 damage per shot. I would buff its APCR pen to, let's go more APCR 336 with calibrated on. And to finish it off, I would give the Mouse 2,200 effective DPM. That's what I would do to the tank. This would put it in a situation where you can outtrade your opponents, but you have much worse DPM than every other tier 10 essentially. However, you have a lot of hit points and you have a lot of pushing potential. This is a tank that should be used for pushes, not for farming damage. And that's where Wargaming gets the tank wrong. Right now, it has a lot of pushing potential, but putting on the sandbags takes away from improved fuel and your mobility. And the armor really isn't that good. So it's just kind of this bad mix. If you had a higher alpha, kept the armor, I think it would be fine, because I don't mind bleeding health if I have a lot of health to bleed. I don't like when my gun's inaccurate and I'm missing every shot and I don't have the alpha to show for it. So I think this is a good way to kind of balance the tank out, make it a bit more enjoyable for everybody involved. That's how I see it. Plus, who wouldn't want to drive a tank with 3,500 HP? It would be a freaking juggernaut. I don't think this would make it overpowered, and if it did, you could slightly nerf either the DPM or the hit points accordingly, but I think this would be a really fun idea to mess around with. The VK90 is currently a really, really strong tank. So let's write that down. VK90. The VK features ridiculously good standard pen, but kind of mediocre premium pen at only 336. It's not great when you compare it to something like a VK72 that has almost 380. Mobility-wise, the tank's fast, 30 kilometers per hour, 15 in reverse. It's got a lot of really good capabilities going for it. There's really only two changes I would make to the VK90. First of all, I would make the lower plate weaker. I would make the lower plate about minus 10 millimeters effective. I think this would still make it very strong if you angle it properly, but against most ammunition, it would be a pen with standard, which I think is more than fine because it's a heavy. It's supposed to side scrape, and you're not supposed to show the lower plate. I would then nerf the hatch as well by about maybe 15 millimeters. This would allow you to actually penetrate the hatch efficiently rather than being a really tricky pen. To balance this out, I would make the turret sides about 20 millimeters stronger. So let's write that. There you go. The reason I'm saying this is the VK90 is very weak when you turn the turret. If you're looking at somebody over here and you turn the turret sides become incredibly weak. And I think giving it just a little bit more, 20 millimeters, would allow it to angle a bit better and get some more bounces. But at the same time, people should be aiming on that hatch, and it should be a weak spot. So I think that having the hatch a little bit weaker would be fair. It would still be over 300 millimeters, but I think it should be weak enough that if you have a well-placed shot, it will pen 99% of the time. The lower plate being weaker, I think, is also fine because it would allow the tank to be able to be penetrated. I think all of us can agree right now that the VK90 is a little bit too strong, especially with the level of pen and the fact that it has combat stabilization on a tank that barely goes above the required speed limit. So I think that this would balance out the tank, but also allow it to be a little bit stronger when dealing with situations, especially side scraping with the turret armor. A skilled player using the VK90 will maneuver it in a way that the hatch is not shown. So I think this is a good way to balance it out to benefit skilled players, but as well, nerf it in a way that if you make misplays, you will get punished. The VK72 is a tank that currently is definitely just a little bit too strong. It features tungsten, it features adrenaline, it has mobility, it has everything you'd want going for it. And I think we can all agree that it's just a little bit too good. So there's really only two things that I would do to the VK90, or not VK90, VK72. So let's write that down. VK72. The first thing that I would do to this vehicle is I would remove its improved suspension. It makes it too mobile. It's that simple. Removing improved suspension would make the tank way better. So remove suspension. There you go. I spelled that completely wrong, but whatever. It gets the job done. Remove the suspension. The other thing I would do to the VK90, or not, I keep saying that wrong, VK72, is I would remove the sandbags. That's all you got to do. These two changes would make the tank a little bit less effective in terms of hit points, and it would also make the tank a little bit less mobile. The tungsten would still allow it to be really dangerous, the lower plate would be penetrable with heat, and I don't really think it would be that hard of a tank to fully deal with less HP and less mobility. It's a super heavy. It shouldn't feature mobility that is, more like the average heavy, which it kind of has right now. So remove suspension and remove sandbags. I think those two things would keep it balanced, but still really strong. The E100 is an absolute beast. It's got really good pen, 377. It's got a huge chunker of alpha damage at 680. It's got decent gun depression at 7 degrees. I really don't have a single problem with the current E100. So if we write down E100, I'm going to say 15 centimeters stays the same. However, I want the 12.8 to be buffed. On World of Tanks PC, the 12.8 is an incredibly solid option, and it allows you to get out very good damage. So I want that 12.8 to have, let's say, obviously we want to keep it competitive to the mouse. And if the mouse is a vehicle that has much more hit points, higher alpha than the 12.8, then I think this one should have a little bit more DPM. So with the 12.8 on the 100, I think we should be looking at around 2,700 DPM if you are running it fully equipped with calibrated. 327 mils of premium pen is a little bit too low, so I would say 336 APCR. And what else would we do to the E100 with this gun? I think the accuracy and aiming time is fine. I think the alpha damage is fine. That's really all I do. I'd give it a solid DPM choice for the 12.8, and I would give it the same stats for the 15 centimeter. This way, you have two different options. You can be a bit higher DPM, but a lot weaker in terms of the holding potential. I think that's fair, and I think that's pretty balanced, and I think a lot of players would agree with those changes. So that's what I would do to the 12.8. I think the rest of the E100 is pretty fair. I don't think the armor is too strong. I really never find this too hard of a vehicle to counter, yet you can still do very well in it, as you can see from my stats. The Grill 15 is obviously a bit of a goofy vehicle in its current state. It's good, but it's literally the worst performing tier 10 in the game. Like, I do okay in it. I've got 3,100 average, but man, that's a lot lower than a lot of my other tanks, especially for a tank destroyer. So if we write down the Grill 15, there is a couple changes I would do. First of all, I want the alpha damage buffed. And I want the alpha damage to be 700. That's what I want it to be. Buff alpha to 700. In return, for 700 damage per shot, I would like the DPM to be around 2500. So let me write down, comma, DPM 2500. Now you might be saying, why the heck would you do that? Well, it's very simple. The Grill is a vehicle that has very poor camo values, but what it features is an incredible profile to get snaps back in the cover. And I really like that about the Grill. It's a fun tank. But the problem is right now the alpha damage is too low at 580 to deal with opponents in front of you. It's just an absolute struggle because you shoot them and then you get spotted and you possibly get nuked. So I want this thing to be a hard hitter with good accuracy, but in return, low DPM. That would allow you to reposition more often. It would allow your camo to feel more effective because you're not poking as much. And it would also allow you to hit really hard, which would make it feel absolutely amazing. I don't think it would be a hard tank to counter. I think that would be really nice. Obviously, I'd buff the HE accordingly, so if the standard is 700, the HE would maybe be 1020. Nothing broken, but enough that would be pretty dang good. The rest of the tank should stay the same. However, I would nerf the dispersion a little bit. So I would change the dispersion from 0.272 to 0.308. That way you can run Refined Gun with its current buffs and still make the tank really accurate, and you have Reticle Cali, but in return, you do have a little bit worse dispersion for the alpha increase. But I think that would be a really good way to make the tank fun, and I think a lot of people would really enjoy that change. The Jagdpanzer 100 is actually a really strong vehicle right now. It's got tungsten, it's got solid DPM, it's got, honestly, everything you'd want in terms of a tank destroyer. There's only one change I would do to the Jagdpanzer, so let's write that down, Jag E100, and the only change I would do to this tank is increase its hit points. Right now the vehicle has 2,236, and I would buff it to 2,400 health. I think that would be a pretty solid buff. The Jag is basically a super heavy, and I think that it should play like a super heavy if it's going to feature no turret, terrible traverse. I mean, just the other day I had a 0 damage game in the tank because I got flanked. And don't get me wrong, it's a beast in a frontline situation, but once you get flanked, especially with the current mediums and the fact that everything can pen you with heat now, I do think that 2,400 health would allow it to be strong, leave the rest of the stats the same, and it would be an absolute bonker with a lot of great capabilities. So I think that's fine. And if you're saying, oh, tungsten's too strong, you have to remember that if you're running tungsten and adrenaline, you have one repair kit with a tank that is incredibly slow and immobile. So I don't have a problem with that at all. I think the Jag just having a little bit of extra HP in the current meta would allow it to be really good, and yeah, it'd be pretty solid. The T100 LT is really, really dangerous right now. It has great DPM, it has pretty good penetration for a light tank. I think 302 millimeters is fine. Damage per shot's all right. The armor is pretty good. Top speed is really good. And the Tracer Shells mechanic is really good as well. So honestly, if I were to change the T100 LT, I wouldn't. I'd keep it the exact same. I really like the current capabilities of the tank. I do pretty well in it, as we can see, 3,400 average damage. That's really good for a light, so clearly it has potential and it can do a lot. I do not think it needs to be changed. Leave it the way it is. The T62A is a really fun medium. It has solid upper plate armor, it has a strong turret, and it has very good DPM, but a higher alpha of 330. Right now the tank is pretty well balanced, but I do have some problems with it. First of all, the T62A is very inaccurate, and I don't really like that. I don't think a lot of people like that. I would change the 0.326 to 0.312. I think that's a cool value that would allow it to be accurate, yet not too accurate to make it ridiculously strong. 6 degrees of gun depression is fine with me, but what I would like to see is the sides buffed from 78 to 90 millimeters. So let's do buff sides to 90 millimeters. The reason I think buffing the sides to 90 millimeters would allow it to be really strong is because right now, the frontal armor is great. The problem is the sides. You can cut right through the sides if you are trying to angle it properly and everything, and it tracks you and it damages your ammo rack or modules. It's annoying. So I definitely think that buffing the side armor, leaving the upper plate the same and the DPM the same with the mobility, would actually allow it to be really, really good, and giving it just a little bit better dispersion would help as well. The 62A is a really fun medium, but as I said, it has some things that I wish were a little better, and we can see that I'm not going too crazy in terms of my damage output right now. The T22 medium is really good. It's got solid armor, especially on the sides. Its upper plate is troll. Its turret is troll, and it's probably the strongest turret in tier 10 for a medium. DPM-wise, it's pretty good at 3,160. Its accuracy is really good. Mobility-wise, the tank is fast. Honestly, I don't think the T22 needs to be changed at all. In fact, I implore Wargaming not to change it. It's really balanced right now, and we're just going to write down T22 stays the same. It just doesn't need changes. And I mean, we can see I'm doing pretty well in it. 3,300 average with 75%. That's what you should be looking at in your medium, so I think that's pretty good, and I don't really want to see it get changed at all. The Object 140 is a bit goofy, because it sacrifices all of its armor for simply the fact that it has high DPM. What I find interesting is that the Object 140 is really not that accurate of a tank at 0.308 dispersion. So personally, if you want my opinion on the Object 140, especially if it's going to have the gun the way it does, first of all, I would buff its gun depression by 1 degree. So if we write Object 140 plus 1 degree of gun depression, not only would I give it more gun depression, but I would make the dispersion 0.28. Not as good as the Leopard, but a little bit worse, still really accurate. This would allow the tank to feature absolutely incredible levels of accuracy. You can run V-stabs, making it really nice. The DPM can stay the same, and everything else can stay the same. I think the armor's fine. I actually really like the 140's current capabilities, but I do think that just a little bit more flexibility in terms of gun depression and a little bit more accuracy would go a long way. So that's really all I would change. It's a good performer. I mean, you can see that. I've got good average damage in it, actually pretty crazy, but it's definitely a tricky vehicle, and it's one of the worst performing tier 10s in the game. The Object 907, let's write that down, 907, is, in my opinion, one of the best mediums in the game. I made a whole video talking about it. It reverses great. It's got a good top speed. Its accuracy is fantastic. Its aiming time is solid. It's got tracer shells. It's got solid everything. I mean, this is just an incredible tank in every single way. So 907 stays the same. I do not think it needs to be changed. I really like the current tank. I think the armor's balanced. If a skilled player is driving it, they can do very well. So let's move on to the Object 777 version 2. And this is a very easy fix. First of all, the gun needs, well, let me write down 7772. First of all, the gun needs AP standard. I hate the APCR. It ruins a lot of the fun on the tank. Second of all, I would nerf the heat pen a bit. I think 384 is too much, so nerf heats to, let's say, 370 millimeters with calibrated on. I think that's fine. And apart from that, doesn't really need any other changes. It's got really good DPM. It's got solid armor. While the reverse speed is very poor, I think it's fair for the level of armor and everything else the vehicle features. There is one thing I would change, though, and that is buff the ammo rack. The ammo rack on the vehicle is absolute trash. It constantly gets nuked. That needs to be changed. If that was fixed, I think the vehicle would be quite impressive. So not much really needs to be done to the 777. I just think those couple things would make it very, very nice. The IS-4 is a big old bummer. And I'm going to be honest, I think the old IS-4 should still be in play. Because we have the Object 260. Wargaming's basically making the IS-4 the Object 260 for no reason. Put it back to the original state. So what do I mean by that? IS-4. First of all, we need 2,800 HP, because that allowed the vehicle to be absolutely incredible. 2,800 you should have with improved assembly. Not only that, but the tank needs a DPM nerf, obviously, if you're going to do that. So instead of having 2,600 DPM, I would say 2,400 DPM would be more than fine. In return, we are obviously going to buff the hull, so instead of being 140 millimeters a hull, we're going to say maybe 170 millimeters a hull. I don't know exactly how much you need, but whatever the original IS-4 stats were before they were nerfed, that's what I want the tank to be. So give it good heat pen, which it already has, have much better hull armor, obviously sides buffed as well, sides buffed. If Wargaming actually listened to me and they went through with these changes, I would go through the exact amount of armor I think the tank should have. Dispersion can stay the way it is. I actually don't mind the 0.326 because it's got poor aiming time. I think the alpha should stay the same. I just think that the IS-4 needs, obviously, a lot more hit points, a lot more armor. In return, I think the tank should keep the same top speed. 42 is fine with me, and I think the reverse is fine as well. But the power to weight, instead of being 15, power to weight should be 14. just so it's a little bit slower on acceleration. I think these are fine changes. I think they would allow the tank to be very enjoyable, and I think a lot of people would agree with those changes. Also, remove super speed boost because it doesn't need it. I will write that down just in case I forget. Remove super speed. Okay, we now move on to the Object 260, which I want to like, but I don't due to a couple problems. The Object 260 is obviously very mobile, and I think it should stay this mobile. The gun is solid, but APCR standard. Nobody wants APCR standard. Change to AP. Not only would I change it to AP, but I would also buff the heat to 360 millimeters effective if you're running calibrated. So obviously giving it more heat penetration. So those are the changes I would do in terms of the gun. I think the accuracy is fine. I think the DPM is really solid. Actually, what I would do is I would lower the DPM from 2800 to 2600 DPM. Now you might be wondering, why the heck would I do that? Well, it's very simple. I want better armor on the 260, and I mean a lot better. So I want the hull on the Object 260 to go from 140 to, I don't know, how much does the IS-7's upper plate have? The IS-7 has 150, but it's at a much steeper angle. So I would say about 160 millimeters of effective hull armor. That way, this tank is very hard, almost impossible. Kind of like a 252 to pen on the upper plate. I would also buff the turret. So let's write buff turrets by about 50 millimeters. The turret really needs a buff. It's too weak right now. These two changes would do two things to the 260. First of all, it would make the armor on the upper plate and turret really effective. As well, lowering the DPM would make the tank much less scary on a ridgeline, but with the mobility, it would be very flexible. I would also change the reverse. So let me write that. Change reverse to 15. I don't think 20 is good. I mean, 20 is good, but I think it should be 15 instead of 20, and that would balance out, again, the more armor. So, in general, the 260 would be a very mobile heavy with really good armor, solid DPM, but nothing crazy, and a big lower plate and kind of mediocre side armor, which it currently has. I kind of want it to be like a tier 10 252 frontally, but I want the sides to be weaker. That way it's not a shot trap like the IS-7. I think this is a pretty fair and balanced way overall to go about the tank, and I think a lot of people would agree with those changes. Obviously, you could say, oh, I want the 260 to go 60 and have high DPM, but I think this would make it a much better brawling vehicle in exactly what I would want it to be, kind of like the PC version. That brings us to the IS-7, which is obviously an absolute beast, so let's make our way over here. IS-7. What does the IS-7 currently have going for it? Well, not a lot in terms of the gun. It's got 2400 DPM, pretty awful dispersion, 460 damage per shot with 6 degrees of gun depression. In general, the IS-7 is pretty mid in that value, but it features tungsten, it features a crap ton of HP at 2650, and it has pretty decent mobility at a top speed of 42 and a reverse of 15. Honestly, I have no problems with the IS-7 whatsoever. I think it's a really fun tank. I think it's a solid tank for beginners. The only thing I would do is I would nerf the sides, specifically black hole. That's all I'm going to say. I think that if you're shooting at the flat side of the IS-7, you should pen the tank. So nerf the sides maybe by about 20 millimeters. Apart from that, everything else is fine. I have no problems with the vehicle. It's a fun tank. It's a fair tank. And while you can do very well in it, I don't think there's anything that inherently makes it overpowered. So I have no problems with the IS-7 in that regard. All right, let's continue down. We have the Object 268 version 4. So let's write that, 268 V4. 268 version 4 is a really solid vehicle. It features reactive. It features, a lot of great capabilities. First of all, remove reactive. I don't think the tank needs reactive. I think it's too good for the vehicle. Then I would change the alpha to 580. We're buffing the grill's alpha, so let's give the 268 version 4 what the grill had. So 580 damage per shot. In return, I would... Actually, the DPM's fine. I have no problem with the DPM being at 2800. But what I would do is I would change dispersion to... It's 0.407 right now. That's awful. I would change the dispersion to 0.344. That would make it somewhat accurate, very fun to drive, And I would also obviously make AP standard, because, again, nobody likes APCR standard. Aiming time can stay the same. I think having a long aiming time but solid dispersion is pretty good. AP standard would be very nice. The gun depression is fine at 5 degrees. The mobility is fine. The only other thing I would do to the Object 268 version 4 is I would buff lower plate by about 10 millimeters. This way, with the calibrated shell changes, the vehicle's armor is a little bit stronger. I think that these changes would allow the vehicle to feel a lot more flexible due to the lower damage per shot. You would be able to shoot more. With the AP, you'd pen more. With the accuracy, it would feel actually pretty solid. And I don't really have any other changes. I actually really like the V4. I just hate how inaccurate the gun is. And if the gun was accurate and you didn't have to sit out in the open as long, it would be a lot better. So that's kind of what I would do to the V4. Then we arrive to the Object 268. What would we do to the 268? Well, the vehicle right now features a very dangerous gun. 430 millimeters of heat. It's got solid dispersion for the alpha damage of 690. It's got good gun depression, solid mobility, and it's got some of the best camo values in the game. What would I do to the 268? Nothing. Everybody enjoys it. Its fatness is like favorite tank right now. I think that overall the 268 should stay the way it is. It's a very enjoyable vehicle, and I have no complaints about it. So, moving on. The Object 263. This is a really fun tank, but again, it has some problems. First of all, 263 AP standard. Why are you making a really inaccurate tank of APCR standard? It's annoying. Nobody wants it. That's the first thing I'm going to say about the vehicle. I have no problem with the DPM. It's really good, so I don't really think it needs a change there at all. The heat pen is really solid. That is all really, really good things. However, if I were to change one thing about the Object 263, I would buff the mantlet by about, let's say, 20 millimeters. Buff mantlet 20 millimeters. That way, you cannot pen the mantlet. It's very annoying that you can actually cut through this vehicle's gun mantlet. I don't like that. I think it's cringe. So, that's really all I do. Nothing else needs to be changed. The DPM, everything is really solid on the vehicle. Yes, I know people don't love the accuracy, but I actually think right now, it's a super solid vehicle. You can see I'm doing very well in it. I just would like AP standard, and I would also like the vehicle to not be cut through on the mantlet of the gun shield there. I think it's a little annoying that now that heat was buffed, you can. So that's really all I would do to the vehicle. Vickers Light, I actually really enjoy currently. I think that the 300 Alpha makes it unique, and I have actually no problem with it. However, what I would like to see is the DPM buffed. Right now it's 3200 with Rammer. I think the Vickers should go to 3400 DPM with the Alpha that it has if you're running Rammer. So we'll make it more like 3300. I think that's fine. Actually, yeah, we'll leave it at 3300 DPM. Nothing else needs to change. The vehicle has solid armor. It has great gun depression. It has really good mobility. It has incredible accuracy. I think just giving it that little oomph in the DPM would allow it to brawl with mediums, but with the lower alpha and less armor, still be a weakness against other players. I think that this would make it very fun and very flexible, but nothing overpowered. So that's what I would do to the Vickers Light. I actually really like the Vickers. Like, you can see my stats are really good in it. 92%, 3500. It's a great tank. I just think that a lot of people would like a little bit more DPM. The FE4202 is a very, very fun tank. It's got really good DPM with the Hesh gun, solid penetration, 10 degrees of gun depression. It's got a lot of things going for it, including really good mobility and all of the shebang. There's only one thing that I would do to the FE4202, and that is buff on move. That's it. It just needs an on-movement buff for the Hesh gun. If it was slightly more accurate on the move, you would hit a lot more shots, which would make it very good. I mean, I do well in it, 3,500 average, but if the tank just didn't miss some of the goofy shots when you're moving it, it would be so nice, especially because you are sacrificing so much for the Hesh. So I really like the 4202, but again, I think that the on-move should just be a little bit better. Now, nothing else really needs to change. I really like the tank. The FE2 and 5B, in the current state, is really strong. It has solid mobility. I don't really see the need of speed boost, but it's got solid mobility. It's got 3000 DPM. It's got really good accuracy, 40 km per hour top speed. The 12 reverse is really poor, and I don't like that at all. So first of all, the 215B, I would buff to 14 kilometers per hour in reverse. I think that would make it a little bit more flexible and a lot more enjoyable. In return, I would remove super speed because it doesn't need super speed. So those are the first two changes that I would do to the FE2 and 5P. Then I would remove sandbags. So let's write that. Remove sandbags. But hear me out. Give tungsten. Yes. This would be such a nice addition to the tank. Tungsten shells would allow the FE2 and 5B, especially with well-placed HESH shells, to absolutely annihilate opponents in front. And you might say, oh, well, that's overpowered. Not really, because if you're running two consumables at the same time, you only have one repair kit. This is a tank that constantly gets lit on fire, has a lot of problems in that situation. So I think it's fair that if you're going to run two consumables, you also have the downsides of possibly getting lit on fire. But I think that it would be a really, really cool way to just rip out damage into your opponents. I think that would be super, super fun. The penetration is really good, so I've got no problems there. In general, the 2 and 5B is an incredible tank. And I really like the current state it's in. It's a super strong vehicle. But as I said, I think it just needs a little bit more reverse to get out of situations it's in. And I think that tungsten with removing the sandbags would make it pretty well balanced. The Super Conqueror is really strong right now. There's only a couple things I would do to the Super Conqueror. Let's write it down. Super Conk. So, first of all, the APCR pen is actually still pretty solid. There's a lot of people that were bummed about it, but I've got no problem with the APCR pen. I think it's pretty good. I have no problem with the HESH. 92 millimeters is really solid. 10 degrees of gun depression is really nice. The mobility is solid. There's only one thing that I would do to the Super Conqueror. And what is that? Well, I would make it so that HE is less damaging on turret. That's it. That's all I would do. It's all it needs. Super Conqueror is an incredible tank, and it's just such a fun vehicle to mess around with. You can see my average damage in it is really good. My win rate's really good. It's such an easy vehicle to drive and have a solid time in. But I think that the HE on the turret is really annoying, so I would like to see a little bit less on that regard. In return, to make it a little more balanced, I would nerf hatch by about maybe 10 millimeters. Does that sound fair? Make the turret a little bit stronger against HE, make the hatch a little bit weaker. That way you can pen it, but you don't want to spam HE, ruining the player's enjoyability. All right, now we have the Mark 6. First of all, I have no problems with the HESH gun that Wargaming is planning on implementing on the vehicle. In fact, I really like it. So first of all, bring HESH gun on tank. However, keep old gun too. That's all it needs. I have no problems with Wargaming giving the Chieftain tungsten. I have no problems with Wargaming giving it the HESH gun. But just give it two gun options. Everybody loves the Chieftain in the current state. It's incredibly enjoyable. It's such a fun vehicle. Why are you going to take away the fun? I've talked about so many times in the channel why this is my favorite gun in the game. It's such a solid vehicle. Taking away that gun is going to ruin so many people's days, and I guarantee people will quit the game over it. Yes, the HESH will be fun, and I might run the HESH gun, but it doesn't mean that I'm always going to want to run the HESH gun. Why can't you give players who spent money the opportunity to choose between two gun options? It's really not that hard, and it would make life so much more fun. So give the Chieftain two gun options. The only other thing I would do is buff turret armor. Keep hatch the same. That's all it needs. Buffing the turret armor while keeping the hatch the same would really, overall, keep it well balanced. It would keep it fair, and I don't think that there would be any problems with the Chieftain whatsoever. Ooh, we have the FV217 Badger. The Badger is a beast. It's got a lot of DPM, a lot of armor, and a pretty solid gun. But there are some things I do not like about the Badger, like it's terrible on movement dispersion. Right now, the Badger is pretty solid, but it has APCR standard. And we know the rule, AP standard. Nobody wants APCR standard. It's absolutely annoying, and it makes life rather unenjoyable. When it comes to the rest of the tank, honestly, I don't think it needs any changes. It's mobile, but its reverse speed balances it in a way that you're not going to get away with any crazy maneuvers. Yes, the on movement is annoying, but in general, it is an absolute powerhouse. It's a solid performer. I don't think it's overpowered, but I do think it's really strong. So, that's it. Keep rest same. That's all the Badger needs. It's really strong in every other regarded as Hesh. Yeah, I don't know what else to tell you. Just leave it the way it is. The 4005 it's a rather interesting one. And honestly, I don't have any problems with the 4005. I mean, it's a little bit cringe that it's able to deal so much damage in such a short amount of time, but in return, it reverses really slow. Wargaming nerfed its only 10, and they took away a lot of its capabilities. So, you want to know the simple change? 4005, remove speed boost. Removing the super speed boost on this tank would stop it from being able to get out of situation faster, and it would punish it for making over-aggressive plays. I think leaving Spall Liner is fine, and I don't have any other problems with the tank, apart from one thing. If we're going to remove super speed boost, I want to buff the on-move. Just a little bit, but I would like the on-move to be just enough that you're actually going to hit your shots, rather than the gun absolutely derping all over the place. I think this would make the 4005 pretty enjoyable, and it wouldn't make it overpowered, especially not compared to something like the FE2 and 5B183, which can absolutely ruin your game. So, what would I do to the 183? Well, let's see. First of all, reverse speed, 8. That's what I think the reverse should be on the 183. Right now, reverse is at 12, and I think that's too fast. I think for this type of tank, with the capabilities it has, it should be really bad on reverse. That's the first thing I will say. The second thing I will say about the 183 is that it's too accurate. With refined gun, it is currently 0.346. And that should not be the case. The vehicle should be about, I'm going to say, 0.38. Dispersion with refined. I think that's fair. I don't think it needs any other changes. I think 8 reverse would cause the tank to be very poor at getting out of situations if it over-aggresses. And I think that the vehicle having much worse dispersion would also make it more punishing. That's it. I mean, I don't want to, ruin the tank. I just don't want to see it hitting every shell across the map. Wargaming thinking that it needs a buff on the dispersion is absolutely absurd, and I have no clue where they get that idea from. The STB-1 it's really strong right now, and for the wrong reasons. I think that the AP pen is way too good. So let's write down STB1. First of all, nerf AP Premium down to, let's say, 315. I think that's fair. I think that's balanced. What else do we have on the vehicle that I would like to see nerfed? Well, the only other change I would like to see done to the STB is the turret armor. I think that the cheeks should be about 20 millimeters less. That's it. The STB can keep the 11 degrees of gun depression. It can have the solid DPM. Oh, yeah. One other thing. If we're going to nerf the turret armor, 0.308 dispersion. What do you guys think about that? So we're going to make it more accurate. That way the gun feels more flexible. We're going to keep the gun depression, and we're going to nerf its premium pen just by a little bit, also giving the vehicle just kind of a more flexible playstyle in general, and I think nerfing the cheeks is going to make it a little bit easier to counter in the process. I think that's a good way to really balance the tank. Obviously, I think that the STB right now is just a little too strong, and I don't think that would ruin the tank, but I do think it would make it a bit more balanced. Type 71 is quite a beast, and I like the way that it has improved suspension. I like the way that it has improved vertical stabilizers. I think that both of those are really enjoyable. The gun has solid pen, solid DPM. It's accurate. Honestly, the only change I would put on the Type 71 is top speed of 40. That's it. I really don't think it needs any other changes. It's a beast. It's fun to play. It's an incredible tank to grind. So, yeah, leave the Type 71 the way it is. Move on to the Ho-Ri. The Ho-Ri is a bit of a cringe tank. First of all, I would remove reactive. I don't see why it needs reactive armor. I think that's a little bit goofy. The accuracy on the tank is fine with me. I think the penetration is fine. I don't really have too many problems in terms of the gun. I don't have too many problems in terms of really anything on the Ho-Ri. The only thing that I would do is nerf the on-move. That's it. Nerf on-move. That's all I would do. Remove reactive and nerf on-move. The gun would still hit hard. It would still have the crazy penetration. The tank would still be pretty mobile. I just think that the tank is able to snap too many shots with its current dispersion, and I would like to see that nerfed. So I don't really think there's any too much else to talk about the Hori, but man, is it just a freaking beast and ripping out damage. The WZ-132-1 is kind of a goofy light. It's a vehicle that I really like playing. I've got good average damage for 13 games in it, but at the same time, it's a very tricky vehicle to actually drive. So, WZ-132-1. What would I do to this vehicle? Well, let's make our way over to the statistics of the tank and take a look at the gun handling. 3020 DPM is fine. Dispersion at 0.308. I would like that to be a little bit better, 0.29 dispersion. What else would I like change? The heat and AP pen is very good. No complaints there. Mobility is fine. Well, there's one thing that I would like changed, and I've said it since day one, 7 degrees of gun depression. That's it. Give it a little bit better dispersion and give it 7 degrees of gun depression. Tank is balanced, it's fun, it's enjoyable, nothing else needs to change. That's my personal belief. I think a lot of people will agree with that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. WZ-121. I think that this is an insanely dangerous vehicle. It's got decent heat pen after the changes, it's got great mobility, solid armor, and a really good amount of DPM with 6 degrees of gun depression over the front. It was only nerfed on the sides of gun depression, which actually a lot of people do not know. In general, I don't think the 121 needs to change at all. I think it's just an amazing tank. Well, there's actually one thing I would like to change on the 121, and that is buff the ammo rack. I hate how often the thing just gets nuked in the ammo rack. That should not be the case. Look at that. We still got quite a few tanks left to go. Holy, this video is going to be a long one. But that is my feelings on the WZ-121. The 121B is obviously another beast-a-rooney. This tank features adaptive concealment, which I actually like. I think that it should only stay on the Chinese vehicles and not make its way over to other nations. The 121B has solid DPM, pretty good accuracy, good aiming time, good mobility. Honestly, it's a very fun tank with not too many downsides whatsoever. In fact, I think the 121B in its current state is really good. So if you want my opinion on the 121B, stays the same. There you go. Wargaming did a decent job balancing it. Why ruin that balancing? The BZ-75 is a pretty fun vehicle. It features 2 different guns. It has a derp gun with decent DPM, accuracy, and penetration. It also has, or not derp gun, sorry, it has a 130mm with those values. Then it has a derp gun, which features much worse dispersion, much worse DPM, but it chunks like a beast. There's only one problem I have with the BZ-75, and that is the pen. So if we were to write down the BZ-75, what I would change is I would give it 280mm of pen on the standard with AP running calibrated, and I would buff the high explosive to 200mm. That's it. Give it a little bit of high explosive pen, a little bit of standard, and leave the rest the same. I think that would be a pretty fair and balanced way to work with the BZ-75. Let me just write 200mm of pen HE. Okay, let's move on. I actually really like the BZ. Like, I got good average damage, I got good win rate in it. I think a lot of people underrate the tank. We arrive to the WZ-111-5A, which, as many of you know, is my favorite, or at least one of my favorite tier 10s in the game. First of all, let's write it down. So what would I do to the 5A? Well, buff pen. A lot. Currently it has 342mm of heat. I want 375mm of heat with Callion. Okay, that's a pretty good change if you ask me. Not only would I give it 375mm of heat, I would also buff its top speed to 50 kilometers per hour. KPH. After buffing the top speed to 50 kilometers per hour, I would buff the turret armor. So let's type that. Buff turrets. And I'd buff it to about 200, let's say plus 30mm. That way you're not cutting through the mantlet. Apart from that, there's only one other change I would make to the 5A, and that is the dispersion. Currently, it's pretty mid at 0.35. I would change the dispersion to 0.326. Or not 0.26, 0.326. There you go. That's my balanced 5A. It has good penetration, it has good mobility, it has solid turret armor, and decent accuracy. And it would allow the tank to feel very flexible, not overpowered, keep the hull the same. It would be such an enjoyable tank, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. So that's what I would do to the 5.8 in the current state. WZ-114 SP2, I know a lot of you do not have it, so it's a little hard for people to fully judge its capabilities, but I think we can all agree that it's pretty dookie balls. I don't average too much in the tank in terms of damage. It's mid as fork. So what would I do to the 114? Well, it's got decent heat pen, so I don't need to change the heat. But what I do think needs to be changed is the mobility. So let's write that down. 114 SP2. So first of all, I would give it a top speed of 40 kilometers per hour. That way, it's a little bit different than the E100 with a pretty good bonking alpha. Not only would I give it 40 kilometers per hour, but I would also give it 8 degrees of gun depression. So 8 degrees. Then to finish off the 114 SP2, I would buff on move and give it a base dispersion value of 0.37. There you go. That's all it needs. So a little bit more flexible, a little bit faster, and you would obviously have that increased level of just everything would be more flexible. I think that's all it really needs. It's a solid tank. It's just really mid. The WZ-113 is a beast. It's got great penetration, and I actually don't mind this tank having a PCR standard for the level of pen that it has on the heat. I think it's a fair trade. Mobility-wise, it's quick. It's got great traverse speed. Honestly, I don't think there's too much I would change about the 113. However, I would give it tungsten. I'm not joking. I think that all the 113 needs is tungsten. That's it. Because it's already a beast, and I think if Wargaming wanted to nerf the DPM, which they did, they should also give it a little bit more in capabilities. The other thing that I want to see on the 113 is 8 degrees over side, just like the World of Tanks PC one. So the front only has 6 degrees, but if you're using the sides of the vehicle, you can make it 8. I think this would make it really cool to work on a ridgeline. It would make it skill-based and balanced. What do you guys think? I think that would be pretty fun. So that's what I would do to the 113. Oh boy, WZ-113 GFT. This is a tank that everybody wants to see nerfed. So what would I do to the 113 GFT? Well, first of all, I would remove reactive. That's a pretty easy change. Then, if I'm not mistaken, what does this tank reverse at? Like 18? Oh, 16. Okay, you know what? Actually, the reverse is fine. We can leave it the way it is. If we want to nerf the 113 GFT, we're not going to touch the pen. We're not going to touch the accuracy because that's not too crazy. What we would do is simply nerf armor by about 20 millimeters on the front. There you go. Tank's done. It's balanced. It's still a strong performer. It still has a lot of HP, but it's a little bit less effective on a ridgeline, which is all that it needs. Bashation 25 ton. This tank is way too strong, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. So let's write that down. Bashation 25 ton. What would I do to this vehicle? Well, it's got ridiculously good view range. 334 meters is way too good. So what would I do? Nerf view range by 15 meters. Not only would I nerf the view range by, I don't know exactly, 10 meters, 15 meters, something like that. Then I would remove reactive, or not reactive, spall liner. I think that would make it a little bit more punished, and change intra to 3 seconds. There you go. Bashation's balanced. It has the same damage per shot, but a longer intra clip. The vehicle still gets to keep shell reload boost. It still has great mobility, but it's also able to be high explosive penned. I think that these are all solid ways to balance the tank. Also, I do think that the DPM should be a little bit lower. I think that nerfing it by 0.4 seconds, which would bring the DPM probably down to around 2,700, would be more fair. I think autoloaders in general should not feature ridiculous levels of DPM, especially ones like this. So I think that these changes in general would be fair for the Bashation, and yeah, that's what I'd end up doing to the tank. AMX 30B stays the same. It's an incredible tank right now, and I absolutely love it. Fatness loves it. Every big YouTuber loves it. I don't know why they are ruining it next update, so yeah, it stays the same. Simple stuff. It's just an absolute beast. The AMX M454. Well, I can tell you the only change that it needs, which is, well, actually 2 changes. Let's do AMX M4 and AP Standard. And one other change, better on move. That's it. That's all it needs. It's got solid armor. It's got solid mobility. It just needs a little bit better on movement dispersion and a little bit better AP. That's it. Everything else is good. It's got good heat pen. I've got no complaints about the rest of the tank, so we'll leave it the way it is. The AMX 50B? Now this is a tricky one. This is a tricky one. The 50B obviously features a crazy clip. It's got really good mobility and in general is a very dangerous tank. And I'm looking at all the stats and everything that it has, and really there's only one thing I would do to the 50B, and that is remove reactive. Done. There you go. The tank's balanced. What's its reverse speed right now? Reverse is at 18. That's fine. Just remove reactive. Congrats. The 50B is now balanced, and I've got no problem with it. Bosch 155. Now, this is a goofy vehicle. It's got a lot of consumables right now. It's got a lot of stuff going on it. Really, it's a pretty easy balance. If we write down the Bosch 155, we're going to start off with the single shot. And all I would do is 640 DPS, and I would give it, that's it, actually, 640 damage per shot. That's it. Same DPM. There you go. Done. And then the double shot, I would AP standard again, and buff on move. There you go. Done. We have solved the Foch 155. It's, in other words, a pretty solid tank. And, oh yeah, one other thing I would do. Buff sides by 20. There you go. I hate the side armor on the Foch. I think a lot of people would agree that the sides of 75 are just too weak. It's too easy to cut through. 95 millimeters would make it much harder to high explosive pen, and you could actually get some bounces if you angled it properly, which I think would be kind of cool. So that's what I do to the Foch. It's not like the track wheels would be any, harder to pen as it is. Caro 45 ton is currently a really strong tank. It's got solid DPM. It's got pretty poor dispersion, though. It's got a lot of things going for it and a lot of things that aren't going for it as well. I like the reserve shell, how long it takes to reload the tank, so I don't think that's anything too overpowered. I think the gun depression is fine. In general, honestly, if I were to balance the Caro, I would simply make the first shell reload instead of 4.53. I would make it 5 seconds. That's it. Because then it would make the tank just a little bit less effective DPM on single shot, and the rest of the clip would still be the same. That's it. That's all I do. Move on. I like the Caro a lot. Well, actually, I'd make the reload a teeny bit longer, and in return, better horse, better power to weight. Because it is a little slow. If it tank's slow, you know it because I'm running engine power boost. Normally on autoloaders, I don't run that, although I guess I take that back because the Progetto is pretty quick. Progetto? Easy. Progetto. I would nerf upper plate, and that's it. Leave everything else the same. I think we can all agree that the Progetto's upper plate is a little bit too strong. It's just ridiculous on how many bounces it can get. I don't like that. But I do love the DPM, I love the mobility, I love everything about the Progetto apart from the upper plate. So that's all I do, just nerf the upper plate. Balanced. CS63 is, oh boy, a tank that we obviously do not love right now. So what would I do to the CS63? Well, that is a pretty basic question. First of all, I would make the accuracy better. Its accuracy right now is 0.321, which is really mid. 0.29 dispersion. That's the first change that I would give the CS. I would then give it 3,200 DPM. That would allow it to obviously feature much better capabilities. It can leave the tungsten, it can leave the gear oil, that is all fine. Already the tank's looking quite a bit better. Then, the final thing I would do, 70 kilometer per hour top speed. Boom. There you go. That's it. That's all it needs. If this tank went 70 and it had those statistics we were talking about before, it would be an absolute blast. It would be super, super fun. Yeah, so that's really all I got. I mean, this tank would just be a blast. So I think that's really all we need to do to the CS. I think a lot of people would agree a 70 km/h top speed would be so much fun to mess around with. And if you're running gear oil, it could technically go 74. However, the power to weight probably wouldn't be good enough, so that would be a waste. But you get the point. That would be really, really fun. TVP 5051. This is an interesting tank. What would I do? Well, let's write it down first. TVP. Nerf upper plate by 20 millimeters. I hate the upper plate on this tank. I think it's really cringe, and it should be weaker. Apart from nerfing the upper plate on this tank, what else would I do? Honestly, the only other thing I would do is buff the accuracy. So I would make the gun 0.308 dispersion. Done. There you go. TVP is balanced. I don't think that would make it overpowered. I think the clipping potential right now is pretty good. And there you go. That's what I do to the TVP. A nerf and a buff. The VZ55, I really like. I like the penetration, I like the mobility, I like a lot about the vehicle. However, there's also some things I don't love about the VZ. Combat stabilization actually is not one of the problems, but it is the tank's reverse speed. So if we write down VZ55, what I would do is 15 reverse, making it quite a bit better, and buff sides by, let's say, how much armor are the sides currently? 100 millimeters. Let's do 10. There you go. That's all it needs. 15 reverse and a little bit better side armor. And congratulations, the VZ is, well, a really, really fun tank. So I think a lot of people would agree with that. Stritz von K. This vehicle is very fun. Stritz von K features a lot of mobility. And it's got solid DPM, pretty good accuracy, but it's got a lot of downsides as well. So let's start off by remove brain rotting adaptive. Wait, it's not adaptive concealment. It's combat stabilization. That's what I wanted to get rid of. Also, plus 10 APCR because it needs more APCR pen. And apart from that, I would say, how much DPM does the Stritz von currently have? 3214. I would do 3200 base DPM. 3200 DPM. Done. That's all the Stritz von needs. It would be a little more accurate. And yeah, I mean, that would make it really, really enjoyable. So that's what I do to the tank. Wow, we're almost done with the list here, guys. We're almost done. We got a few tanks left. First of all, we have the Kranwagen. All right, first of all, 40 kph. Simple as that. 40 km/h. And the reverse, I would nerf to 15. So let's write in reverse 15. Done. Then we arrive to super speed boost and reticle Cali. Remove speed boost. Done. I think reticle Cali is fine on the tank. I'm not going to complain too much about that. In terms of the DPM, the accuracy, I have no problems with the Kron whatsoever. Yeah, actually, I think the Kron is fine the way it is in terms of the gun and everything. I would just remove super speed boost and give it a top speed of 40. It would make the tank a little bit more enjoyable, and I would have no problems there. So we got 3 tanks left. First of all, we have the Rinocerante, which doesn't really need any changes. I'm just going to say Rhino stays the same. We have the 60 TP, which obviously AP standard. What else do we have about the 60? I think the heat pen is fine. I have no problem with the 356 mils of heat. I think the tungsten is fine. I really like that. I think the gear oil is fine. The reverse speed is really, really good, and I don't have any problem with that. Yeah, honestly, that's all I do. AP standard. Leave the rest the same. That's all the 60 needs, and it would be just such a beast. Last tank, the Minorato. So, let's do the Minnow. AP standard, obviously. And then, what would I do to the Minnow? Well, the armor is fine, in my opinion. But here's what I would do. I would nerf lower plate by 40 millimeters. In return, buff turret by 20 millimeters. And then I would nerf hatch by 10 millimeters. There you go. It's a lot of stuff, but essentially, I want the lower plate weaker. I want the turret stronger and the hatch weaker. That way, if you aim at the hatch, you can pen it, but the turret itself is stronger, and the lower plate is the big weak spot. Apart from that, when it comes to the gun on the Minnow, I don't really think much needs to change. I like the way it works. It's got solid DPM if you use it properly. The only other thing I would change about the Minnow is 0.3... Let's do 0.37 dispersion. There you go. That's it, ladies and gents. I have now balanced every single tier 10 in the game. Now, obviously, people will have disagreements with some of the changes that I have chosen, but I think we can all agree for the most part that these are much better changes than what Wargaming has planned for the massive rebalance of the game. I think that these changes would balance out the tanks themselves, make them each unique, which is something that Wargaming really tries to do, and at the same time does not abuse mechanics. I don't know. But that's what I say. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Let me know if you agreed with this whole list of vehicles. And yeah, hopefully you listen to Wargaming. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.